quickly play this clip from Chris Johnston, who was on his CJ show, which you can find on YouTube as well as podcasts, I believe, along with Julian McKenzie. There'd been a lot of talk that the Jets were going to make a big push to sign your Sean Monahan. They might have to wait until after July 1st to do that. Here's what CJ had to say about Sean Monahan's future and a potential re-signing with the Jets.
I think Monahan's likely going to test free agency. At his stage of his career, you could see why he might want to choose where his next destination is. Ehlers, I've heard some of those trade rumors out there. I can't gauge the likelihood. It seems certainly possible. You're getting to a point where he's 1 year out from, he's not a free agent this year, right? He's got one more year on his contract, I believe. So you're kind of making a decision one way or another. And I think certainly he would have some value out there, but it's all about finding the right trade fit. And at this point, I don't have a good sense of if anything makes sense for the Jets, but certainly we'll dig into that as we get a little closer to the draft and the trading period heating up.
Oh, and as CJ just mentioned, that is going to be a big topic for us as we get closer to heading down to Vegas for the draft at the Sphere on the 28th and 29th. And then, of course, July 1st, which is also the opening of free agency, is the first day that Nikolaj Ehlers could be extended by the Winnipeg Jets. So that'll be a big topic. But Monahan's interesting. And I'm sort of mixed on this whole conversation of re-signing Monahan. I think on a shorter term deal, he certainly could be a player that I think would be valuable to the Winnipeg Jets, looking at their depth at the center position. But I understand where Sean Monahan is at, and he's probably looking for some significant money, and he's probably looking for security of as long of a deal as possible. And the more I think about the term that might be involved in that deal, it does give me some thoughts that maybe going a different direction might be in the best interest of the team overall. Not maybe necessarily in the short term for this year, but beyond. Kenny, let's start with Monahan. Let us know if you've heard anything. And kind of things have been somewhat quiet. I know there was the belief that the Winnipeg Jets would really like to keep Monahan.
Sure.
From your perspective, what makes sense for the team when it comes to money, but also term? I have a feeling that if Monahan gets to July 1st, I'm not sure that there's a 4-year deal out there waiting for Sean Monahan. And while I like the idea of Monahan coming back, personally, I'd be a little apprehensive for getting into a longer term deal. That might mean paying a little bit more money in the short term. I'm not sure. But what's your read on that whole situation? And from a Jet perspective, what would make sense for the club?
Sure, Hassan. That's the tricky song and dance here, right? You have a guy who basically played on two show me contract last year. He's looking for a substantial raise from the $2 million he made. Is he going to get what he got as a prolific player in Calgary? That I'm not sure. I think he's 29 years old. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the odometer is, there's been a lot of hard miles in the last couple of years, but he's overcome those injuries and shown that he can be a very productive player. So I do see him wanting a deal at least, 4 is a great number, Huss. I think that, if you're the Jets and you want to sign Sean Monahan, I think you have to go to a 4th year. We always talk about the parallel with Paul Stastny. He got a 3-year deal in Vegas. The Jets were certainly comfortable with 2. They probably made an offer on the 3rd year, but then, Vegas just kind of matched the money or maybe exceeded it a little bit. So I do think that the Jets would be comfortable going to 3 for sure. And I think the 4th year would maybe be what you're looking for. If you're Sean Monahan's agent, you're probably saying it's going to take 5 years. In the preliminary discussions, can he get 5 years? Now, I'm not sure. There certainly are some, risks attached to that, but this is also a guy who, the reason why the Jets would want to keep him, Huss, he checked all the boxes basically, right? What happened after Sean Monahan arrived? A team that was among the worst in face-off percentage found their best face-off guy. He played on the penalty kill. He was a big part of the power play, and the power play was much better when Sean Monahan and Gabriel Velarde were out there together, right? He plays strong minutes at 5-on-5, and he's on the ice either, chasing a 1-goal deficit or protecting a 1-goal lead. So, if you're the agent and you're listening to a coach say, oh, hey, well, he touches all parts of the game. Well, of course you're wanting to get term and dollar, right? So now what are the other situations that make sense for Sean Monahan, and what is he looking for? I mean, to me, there's a couple obvious things that make sense. You're looking at a team that is looking to change the construction of its roster. Well, who's one of his best friends in the game, Huss? Johnny Gaudreau. Incredible success together. What is the Columbus Blue Jackets' biggest need over the last 5 seasons? Number one, center depth. I mean, is Sean Monahan, can he go in there as a number one or more of a 1B behind Adam Fantilli, depending on where you want to play him? That certainly would be a possibility that Don Waddell would be looking for if Sean does get to free agency. And to me, another one too, if you're Ottawa, I mean, Sean had great success as a junior player with the Ottawa 67s. They've got lots of center talent, but would he be a guy that would maybe help on the culture and leadership side of things, and you're trying to get yourself back up the ladder? There's lots of teams that would be interested in Sean Monahan. How many of those teams are interested in going in 4 years and at a dollar value that's probably, it's got to be definitely north of 4.5. It's probably north of 5. Can he get to 6 or higher? That would be also a question that I have. I don't think the Jets can go to $6 million on a 4 or 5 year deal personally, but that depends on if you don't sign him, you got to replace him, or else you're rolling into the season with either Cole Perfetti or Brad Lambert as your number 2C. So not saying that they wouldn't do that, but that's part of the consideration. Now, and sorry, I should also say Vladislav Nemesnikov, spent a good chunk of last year in that role and would be an option to be played in that role also.
Yeah, I'm it's interesting you put it that way. If those are the numbers and the terms, I think they got to start figuring out a plan B. Because, I mean, from where I'm at, I'm not going.
What would you be comfortable? 4.5 or what?
If it was 3 years, I would do that. And again, there might be a higher bidder and there might be a better opportunity. But I mean, when you think of looking at the Jets, Mark Scheifele is here, Adam Lowry is here. Like, if Sean Monahan is in that role, how long is he your number 2 center?
Sure.
What does that do to younger players? Maybe not immediately ready right now in October, but later on this season, next year, the year after, what does that do? I mean, obviously, if you're spending that sort of money on a player with that level of commitment, I just wouldn't want them to get into a situation like they're in right now with Nate Schmidt, where you've got other players you'd probably be rather playing ahead of him, but you're on the hook for a big amount of money, and it's a spot on your roster that's taking up key cap space. And I'm not saying that would happen. Listen, Monahan, I think, has really showed the last couple years that the worries that he was done very early were very much mischaracterized, and it's all to his credit. I mean, he had a 1-year deal at 1.9 last year, far exceeded it, earned the Montreal Canadiens some great draft capital and coming here and made an impact here in Winnipeg. But this organization, I think Kevin Cheveldayoff, when they're looking at this right now, probably the reason why it looks like it might get to July 1st is that they want to avoid being in a situation where you've got an older veteran player that might be on the back nine or the downside of their career, taking up cap space and taking up a roster spot that you might be best served for a younger player. And, in the next couple of years, absolutely you can live with that. For 3, to me, I wouldn't go 4 personally. That's just my own opinion. I guess others will have their own, because, it is, to your point though, it's very, it's tough to thread the immediate needs of the hockey club and what this means for next year, but also thinking about the big picture over the life of that contract and what that may prevent you from doing. And listen, if a guy in the second year of a deal like that gets passed and there's someone else playing number 2 center and you've got Adam Lowry as your third line, is he your fourth line guy? Does he move to the wing? There's all sorts of things, and that's why this is going to be something that I think takes a little bit of time. Although I wouldn't be surprised, Ken, and again, this is just sort of me reading the tea leaves, as we see more and more guys on the other side of 30 get to free agency. It's not like it was 5-6 years ago where teams were just more than happy to throw out the dollars and the years. And despite the fact that he had the great season last year, I'm not sure there's a team that's out there saying, we got 4 for you right now, come on down.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting part, right? I mean, but when you're also talking, I mean, Huss, you talked about it right off the top. When you're talking about Scheifele and Hellebuck, can you afford to wait till the third year for whether it's Brad Lambert to grow into that job, right? I mean, you're the best chance at the window is probably earlier in those 7-year extensions than later. Not that, to say that they can't, improve as the contracts move along, but your best chance is when those guys are probably in their low 30s rather than their mid to late 30s, right? So that's the threading of the needle that you talk about it. And Nikolaj Ehlers, that's a great transition, right? So, it's easy to see. We see what's out there. We see what's on social media. We see, and we talk to people, whether it's people in the hockey business or people that are just fans. Nikolaj Ehlers didn't have a productive playoff, but for everything we talk about Nikolaj Ehlers, if the Jets choose to move on in a trade for Ehlers, that's 25 even strength goals the organization that didn't score a lot is going to have to replace. So how many of those goals is Brad Lambert replacing? How many more goals can Cole Perfetti have outside of the 19 he produced in the 74 games, I want to say? So, I mean, that's the other part of the equation. So, I mean, it'll be fascinating to see what happens. And to me, Huss, it comes down to what the offers are on Nikolaj Ehlers. If the Jets can improve their hockey team, which is hard to do given the play-driving abilities of Nikolaj Ehlers, of course they have to listen and consider it. But we've seen the Jets take guys in the last year of their deals and use them as self-rentals. So I wouldn't rule that. To me, it's still a 3-outcome scenario. Self-rental, extension, or trade. All three would still be on the table. And it's not like they have to decide on the draft floor. I mean, obviously, Nikolaj Ehlers is probably the player that gives them their best chance to get a player and get back into the first round. But the Jets aren't going to, treat this as a hard deadline in June. They can keep Ehlers. Again, is there a risk attached to that? Sure. Could he get hurt? Sure. But he also could have a breakout season, and maybe there's still a chance at an extension. So,
well, just on that extension, let me ask you this. Rick Bowness isn't the coach anymore. He was calling the shots as far as who was playing with who and all that.
yeah.
Do you think that the move to Arnie as the head coach changes things at all about, the potential of Nikolaj Ehlers maybe getting a little bit more run at the top, but putting him in a situation where he feels more comfortable to sign long-term and re-up with the Winnipeg Jets?
Sure, it's obviously a possibility, but I mean, only Scott Arniel and Nikolaj Ehlers are having those conversations, right? And you still have to find a comfortable number in term. Do I think that Ehlers has reached the point where he's out of here for sure? Of course not. I mean, we know how he answered my question the other day. Other day, it feels like the other day, but it was a long time ago. I mean, again, people in the moment, all you got to do is offer the number that you're comfortable with, and the extension happens. Right. But it's not as easy as that. If it was, the extension would already, be getting closer to getting close to being signed. But to me, I don't think that there's anything acrimonious on the two sides. Would Ehlers like more ice time? Of course. But he spent less time. He's not a guy who's constantly banging on the table saying, I don't know why I'm not playing more. That's not not really in his DNA. But at the same time, you got to produce. And I think Nikolaj Ehlers is a guy that, I've said this before, I think he can be a 35, 40 goal, 80 point kind of guy if he's on the first power play and is getting first line minutes. But also too, can you find a team out there that's willing to trade for him, with the caveat of maybe having the opportunity to negotiate an extension? And then what does that mean in the big picture? But Huss, that's super dangerous. I've already talked about the even strength production, which is so critical. The Jets we saw in the playoffs, Huss, they need to get faster. So if you're going to trade your fastest player, how are you getting faster, right? I mean, that's the other part, that's the other part of the equation. What are you getting back? And, yes, you're probably adding Brad Lambert. That is going to help your speed quotient for sure. But, I mean, even down the road, Rutger McGroarty and Colby Barlow are both not burners. They're both working on their skating. And they're going to be arriving in either the next year or two, most likely. So it's going to be interesting. Again, that's the other part of threading the needle with what they're going to need to bring in to improve their roster to compete with the likes of Colorado, Dallas, and all the other teams that are going here. And us, I was talking about this just a little while ago. I mean, we talk about the lessons the Jets have to learn. How about the lesson the Oilers learned from losing to the Jets and getting swept in the Canadian North Division year? Look what's happened with them since that time. Bringing in Ekholm and having that number one defenseman they were kind of lacking, but they still had to develop Evan Bouchard over the last couple of years. They had to go out and get Zach Hyman. So things sort of can change quickly, but a lot of it to me is related to roster construction, and that's the big challenge for Kevin Cheveldayoff this summer.